Hello fight fans, welcome to Fight Scene. This is my YouTube channel where I go over all things MMA, and today I want to talk a little bit about UFC 222, which is literally just ended about 10 seconds ago. I'll get into the result of what happened. The finish just happened about 10 seconds ago and I turned on the camera. I just wanted to get this out as fast as possible before I go to bed. I'm changing things up a little bit today. Getting rid of the UFC 3 video game stuff. I'm not a big fan of that game, and I don't know that a lot of people were. So before I was using that as a backdrop, and now you're going to see my face, so that's a little bit different. If you're coming from the pay-per-view or you're coming from the internet to try and find the actual fights on YouTube, I'm sorry if I clickbaited you into watching this video, but what I want to do in this video is go over the results of what happened in UFC 222. So thanks for joining me. If you're brand new to this channel, I know I have a couple of people. There's one guy, I can't pronounce his name right now because he's got a weird username, but super loyal user. You know who you're talking about. Thanks for watching this video, and thanks to my friends who are just checking out my opinions on MMA, and I appreciate you just taking a little bit of time to watch it. It was an interesting event. You know, it wasn't necessarily something that I thought was going to be the biggest name value or create the biggest excitement in the sport because the names on the card weren't that big. But really, the card in and of itself, you look at Dariush, you look at some of the undercard fighters, and, you know, it was a decent card, and I think that there were some pretty exciting fights on the card. I want to talk about a couple of the ones that really stood out to me in the event, and I will be sharing the results of the event, so just be very, very careful. If you haven't seen the event, you were coming here to take a look and see the fights, and you haven't turned off this video yet, I am going to be giving away the results because I'm assuming that if you're on the internet anytime after these fights have taken place, it's kind of on you. I've had fights spoiled for me by going on the internet, and so I am going to be giving away some spoilers, so just be careful to turn off this video now if you have not seen the event and you were clicking on the video because you thought I was going to put pirated, copyrighted stuff up online. Anyway, the first one that I want to go over is the Mackenzie Dern fight, and the only reason I want to go over it is because I know Mackenzie Dern had a lot of heat coming into her, this being her UFC debut, and she's had a lot of spotlight because of who she is, jiu-jitsu world champion and all this stuff. I haven't spent a ton of time following her story coming up into the UFC. Obviously, I knew who she was because I follow the sport, and a lot of people talk about her because they think she's attractive, and obviously her jiu-jitsu is very good. And so I've seen the Gabby Garcia jiu-jitsu match and whatnot. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that fight because personally I thought that the decision was not very good. I don't think that she won that fight. And I think for a UFC debut, she did okay. But I think that there's some pretty obvious holes in her game that she's going to need to figure out if she wants to be anywhere near the top tier of the UFC 115-pound division. In particular, I think if you watch the fight, it's quite clear that her striking, she's aggressive. She's got some guts, right? She's not afraid to throw, and I commend her for that. But there's some pretty significant holes in her stand-up game and her boxing, and I think that could very well be exploited even more than it was tonight if she doesn't at least tighten up some of her boxing. But the thing that really stood out to me in this fight that I wanted to mention was the judging. Because when I heard the judging, I thought to myself, I was kind of listening and watching the fight, and I'm thinking, well, this, you know, is pretty clearly not going to go in Mackenzie's way. I can't remember the name of the other fighter right now. It's getting a bit late for me. But anyway, I thought it was pretty clearly in favor of the other fighter. And so I knew in the back of my mind, though, that they're trying to build up Mackenzie as a fighter and a name because she already has that draw value. And so I was worried that something like this might happen. And sure enough, a split decision happened. But what stood out to me is that one of the judges on that fight was Adelaide Byrd. And I thought that to me is the most notable thing, maybe not of the whole pay-per-view, but of this fight, was that Adelaide Byrd is still judging MMA events. And if you're not familiar with who Adelaide Byrd is, she is the wife of the ref that had reffed McGregor versus Mayweather, but she's also one of the judges in the Triple G versus Canelo Alvarez boxing match, which is, you know, widely regarded as just a complete screw up. That fight ended in a draw, even though it was very, very clearly a win for Triple G. And Adelaide Byrd got a lot of scrutiny for her part in that decision. And Sure enough, I thought I had read, and maybe I was wrong, that she was going to be taking a break, or the Nevada State Athletic Commission was giving her some sort of, sabbatical from judging fights, but apparently not, because there she is back in Nevada judging fights, and she scored this fight for Mackenzie Dern, and I think Adelaide Bird needs to just take a break and maybe receive some retraining. Do I think I could do a better job? I'm not saying that. I know she's judged a lot of fights, and I'm not trying to be arrogant because I know the job is really hard, but I think she has a proven track record of not being able to call fights correctly, just to put it plainly. And so that was the thing that really stood out for me. I'm sure Mackenzie Dern will be headlining undercards in the future. She is got that name value and has some excitement behind her, but I think for her, they might be pushing her too quickly. I think it was Luke Thomas that said, really, she needs to build up more fights in the farm leagues or the lower tier fight promotion. She's got to get more fights before she's ready for the UFC. They've thrown her into the UFC quite early, and I think you can see that very, very easily in her fight. So that's what I thought about Mackenzie Dern. And then as well, if you look at my previous video where I gave my predictions on today's fights, I talked a little bit about Cat Zingano, and I had said that I thought that she would lose. And I'll be honest, it's not because I thought it's not for any analytical or specific technical reasons. I just think that ring rust is significant, and Ketland did have a big win over Sarah McMahon, and for a long time I thought Sarah McMahon was the gatekeeper of the division, and so it wasn't necessarily that I thought that Cat Zingano wasn't a talented fighter and that she would lose this fight because Ketland is better than she is. I just have been watching fights for a long time, and I feel like I've seen this story before where there's this fighter who take some time off, they're the big name, they kind of lose to this up-and-coming person. Even Stephan Bonner versus John Jones to me is a really good example of that. You have Stephan Bonner, he's this staple in the light heavyweight division, and here comes along this kid, John Jones, and takes him out, and the rest is history. And so I felt the same way about this fight with Ketland and Cat Zingano. And Ketland's a real contender in this division. Like I said, a win over Sarah McMahon, who's a very strong wrestler. She looked really good against Cat Zingano. She had good wrestling, good jiu-jitsu, great stand-up, and I think she's calling for a title shot. I'm not sure that she's ready yet. I don't know, but I know that she's definitely a contender and will likely give some or make some waves rather in that division at 135 in the UFC. And then from my last video, one of the things that I pointed out was Andrei Arlovski versus Stefan Struve was a bit of a toss-up for me. I had really no idea who was going to win this fight. I think in that video I picked Stefan Struve, but if I'm being honest with you, every minute I had switched who I thought was going to win this fight. And Arlovski has been one of my favorite fighters for a really long time. I kind of stopped following him a little bit because he hasn't had a great couple years, and I thought it was time for him to hang it up. And so I didn't realize that he had switched camps, and now his head trainer is Mike Brown, which apparently is proving to be quite a great decision because he looked fantastic tonight. Stefan Struve didn't look like he was in the fight at all, and they were talking about the takedowns landed by Arlovski being this really big moment for him, and is that going to be enough for him? He was calling for a title shot as well, saying that he wants to make another run for the title, and there's nobody who wants to see that more than me. Is adding wrestling at this point in his career, so late in his career, going to make the difference? I guess we're going to see. I personally don't think it will. I think that he has taken a lot of damage over the years, and that's going to be a challenge against the top tier of the division. I mean, you could give him somebody like Curtis Blades, maybe. I think Curtis Blades would probably be a little bit too much for him. I think Stipe is way too much for him. We could do a rematch against Verdum. That might be a good fight. I never really loved the way that fight had ended back in the day. And so there are options for Arlovski if he wants to make another run for it. Absolutely, let's do that because he definitely again has that drawing power, and I'll tune in to watch him every time maybe not every time he fights, but when he really has it together and he's on the main card, I'll be pulling for Arlovski. I really like him, and so hopefully he does make another run for the title, and hopefully that goes really well. I personally don't think that he will get that title shot, but you never know. New trainer. maybe they can really help pull together his game, add in that takedown component, add in that wrestling along with his already great striking, and maybe he can make a run. But he's really getting on. He's been around. Like I said in the previous video, him versus Tim Sylvia in their second fight was the first one that I had ever gone to a bar to watch, and that was in 2006, I think. So, he's been around the fight game for a really long time. I hope he stays around, but it's almost time to call it for a career for Arlovski, and I'm not sure that he'll be able to make that title run, but I'll watch if he does. And so yeah. And then there's the Sean O'Malley fight, which was a great fight. I mean, that Sean O'Malley kid, he's exciting. You can't deny that he's exciting to watch. I was texting with a friend, and I was saying I don't really know what to think of this kid yet. I don't know if I like him. I'm not sure if I really buy the whole shtick. I mean, he's obviously fun to watch, but I wasn't sure on just as a personality if I liked him and how I felt about him. And at the end of tonight, I feel a little bit better about it. Like he has a very fun style to watch, and he's got some power, and I can understand why the UFC is pushing him and putting him on that main card very quickly, because he's going to draw eyes to the screen, and in a time when stars are a little bit fewer and far between, he is definitely that person. I hate to draw the comparison to Conor McGregor, because that's what everybody does. Anytime that there's anybody that stands out, that kind of talks cool, they say, oh, this could be another Conor McGregor or something. And I hate doing that. And maybe it's because he's got that big chest tattoo that just kind of makes him look like a Conor McGregor. He's lanky and long like Conor. And so I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of Conor McGregor comparisons. And from a fighting style, I can understand that, because he is very, very fun to watch. But the thing that really stood out to me when watching the fight is that Conor McGregor is technically very sound. His fundamentals are very good. His boxing is very solid. If you don't believe me, go watch the Floyd fight again and look at his jab. Look how good his jab has become over the years. Look at him slip a jab and then counter with a straight and knock out Eddie Alvarez and knock down Chad Mendes and what he did to Aldo. I mean, he just does it over and over and over again. And again, my bias is showing I am a Conor McGregor fan, but Conor McGregor's fundamentals are very strong. Yes, he does have this flashy style, but it comes with that foundation of sound and solid striking. And what I'm not sure about at this point is whether or not Sean O'Malley has that. I don't know a lot about him, but I have heard through the interviews that he did come to MMA a bit later in his, he's very young, but later in his career. He didn't grow up doing it. He didn't grow up wrestling from the age of 4. He's taken it on earlier. And so, are those fundamentals there? It certainly looks like they are in the fights, but I'm not sure. I don't know if he'll have problems. And unfortunately, obviously, he suffered that injury to his leg, so he's going to be out for a little while. And so we'll see. There's a lot of questions to me still about Sean O'Malley. I don't think we have the answer for those looking to know, is he that contender? Is he the next big star? Is he going to make a push for the title? There's still a lot of unknown information for us. And, he did sort of fade a little bit later in the fight, even before the foot injury. But also the balls on this kid, just to be honest with you. Like, the fact that he fought the last part of that third round with one foot was impeccable. And he went for like a what do they call it? Clock choke, or he went for like a crucifix style choke position at one point. Again, he's got one foot at this point, so his heart was second to none. You see him just grit it out at the end of the fight. The ref's asking him if he wants to stop, and he says no. And then the second the bell goes, you just see him, like, the adrenaline dump and feel the pain that was, I guess it was his ankle or his foot that was completely broken. And so it was a fun moment, and you feel for the guy. You want to see them come back and not get those injuries, but I think he'll be okay. So Sean O'Malley is still a question for me. I don't know personality-wise if I'm a big fan. Fighting-wise, I do enjoy watching him. I'll watch him again, but I don't know if he is that next big thing. He looks like it so far, but let's put him up against not a top 10, maybe a top 15 or just a recognizable name, and then see how he does before I reserve the right to just sort of hold back judgment until I see him against a top 20, top 15 kind of guy. So yeah, that was a fun fight. And then not lastly, but the co-main event, we have Brian Ortega versus Frankie Edgar. And man, I never would have saw that coming. So here's where the big spoiler occurs. Brian Ortega in the first round TKOs Frankie Edgar. And in a million years, if I were to think about all the ways, if you knew the outcome, if you did some regression analysis and you knew what the outcome was, which was Brian Ortega winning the fight, if you were to go back and try and figure out all the ways that Brian Ortega could win this fight, never would you think that it would happen through kickboxing, through an elbow, through boxing, and striking on the feet. You would think that maybe he took him down. You saw at one point that Frankie kind of ducks under and Brian locks up that guillotine that is going to be a major threat for anybody. So you could assume that, well, I didn't assume that Brian was going to win at all. But you could think to yourself, if Brian was going to win, maybe he would do it through jiu-jitsu. Maybe he'd take Frankie down somehow and armbar him. Maybe he would just grind him out to a decision. I mean, there's a lot of ways that you could imagine Brian Ortega winning this fight. Winning by outstriking Frankie Edgar is not one that I could have ever anticipated. I think that Frankie Edgar remains one of the best boxers ever in the lightweight and flyweight division, and I didn't expect that at all. And Brian Ortega he's going to be a real problem for anybody. He's a big threat. He's undefeated, and he is massive for 145 pounds. How long he's going to be able to make 145 pounds for, I don't know. He's younger, so again, younger fighters, they don't sometimes have that same weight that an older fighter will have. And he's really, really big for the division. And so that's a bonus. He looked at least 2 weight divisions bigger than Frankie Edgar in that fight, for sure. At least 2 weight divisions. Frankie's small, but Brian was massive. And I will say, Frankie did get a lot of the better exchanges on the feet. Frankie's boxing looked really good. So if I were to fast forward to a what's his name? Max Holloway. Sorry. If I were to fast forward to a Max Holloway fight, I'm probably going to, maybe I should stop doubting Ortega, but I'm probably going to take Max in that fight because Frankie was looking great on the feet. He was exiting out of his combos really well. He was getting in and he landed a couple of big overhands. I thought the fight was going exactly how I thought it would go, which is Frankie sort of piecing him up on the feet. And Brian Ortega lands that elbow and rocks him and is the first guy to ever TKO Frankie. I was a little upset at the stoppage at first just because he's Frankie Edgar, but it was a good stoppage. I just, Frankie kind of comes back a lot, but it was a good stoppage and nobody's ever stopped Frankie before. And so I should probably stop doubting Brian Ortega, but if I were to be a betting man, I would probably bet on Max Holloway in the fight. But again, I mean, Brian Ortega is the real deal. His jiu-jitsu is phenomenal, and you wouldn't necessarily think his stand-up's that good because his jiu-jitsu stands out so much. But he put it on. He put it on Frankie at the end of that last exchange. So, I never saw that coming. I'm a big Frankie Edgar fan. I still stand by what I said. I think he is one of the best flyweights ever. I think he will always be a top contender. He did look really good, but a big setback in the career of Frankie Edgar, and I'm interested to see what's next for him in the whether it's the lightweight division, the flyweight division. I still want to see that Conor McGregor Frankie Edgar fight. I think that's a really good fight. And you never know. Maybe Frankie goes down to 135. I think I've heard that he can make it. He seems small, but we're talking about the guy that was the lightweight champ at one point, and he's the smaller guy at featherweight. So it's just unreal. But Brian Ortega is something to look out for, somebody to watch. And if you were to tell me in 9 months that he is the champion at 145 and making a run at lightweight, I wouldn't even be a little surprised. He could be champion at 145 and easily. He has a future regardless of what happens. He obviously has a future at lightweight because of his size. Eventually, he's not going to want to do that cut anymore, or he'll grow and age a little bit, and his body won't allow him to do that cut anymore. So his future's at 155. What that will look like, I'm not sure. But man, he looked good tonight, and it couldn't happen to a nicer guy. It was so hard for me in this fight to pick somebody because they're just both such great role models. And Brian Ortega said, he's in it for the kids, and he's got that story about that. I think it's Brendan Schaub shared on the radio that he came from a gang and walked into the halls of the Jiu-Jitsu Gracie Academy, and it's such a great story. If you haven't heard Brendan talk about that on the Luke Thomas Sirius XM show, go check that out. But couldn't happen to a nicer guy. And so Brian Ortega, somebody I've kind of slept on a little bit, is definitely making me a fan every time he gets out there and fights. He's beating my favorite people in Cub Swanson and Frankie Edgar, so it's hard, but really great guy, and I'm kind of happy to have him have a win, I suppose. I don't know. It's hard. I'm a big Frankie fan, so that was a little tough to watch, but it is what it is. That's the fight game, right? We've seen it happen before. And lastly, we have the Chris Cyborg fight, and it's kind of what I expected, I guess. She got her opponent got the takedown. I'm kind of blanking all the names tonight. There's a lot of people that weren't really big names on the card. Kunsakaya, she got that takedown, but she got it after getting slammed with a right hook or something, right? Cyborg wastes no time coming in there, lands a big combination, basically drops Kunsakaya right away, and she shoots for a takedown and then kind of controls her a little bit on the ground. But then the Cyborg gets up, and once they exited that clinch, Cyborg just looked like she was so angry and put it on her. I mean, at this point, it's basically just an honor to be beaten up by Chris Cyborg. And she is so fun to watch, but it's because her competition just is not on her level. She's basically just continually beating up 135-pound fighters. And so it's hard for me to sing her praises as the greatest female fighter ever. I think she is, but it's hard to talk about because she's just not fighting the competition. If you're a female fighter at this point, it's just a badge of honor to be slammed and beaten up by Chris Cyborg. So that's what we saw tonight. There was a little bit of time there where she got controlled on the ground after she rocked her opponent, but it was really nothing. I think the only fight that you can make for Cyborg at this point is Amanda Nunes. I think that's the only one that really makes sense. But, Nunes now has Ketlin Vieira coming up. And so I don't know. We'll see. The new era of the UFC being owned by WME is to make as much money as possible, regardless of the cost of what that does to the sport or future pay-per-views. And so I think it's pretty obvious that we'll see Amanda Nunes versus Cyborg, and I'll pick Cyborg in that fight. I don't think you can pick against Cyborg given her size and experience. And she's just, maybe the greatest we've ever seen, probably, but it's hard to say. It's hard to look at her and go, "Oh, you're so good. This is amazing," because the competition just isn't on her level, and so that is what it is. Anyway, thanks for watching. I appreciate you staying up. If you're watching this right after the pay-per-view, you can probably go over now and watch the post-fight press conference right on the UFC channel. If not, thanks for watching. I appreciate you coming and enjoying my content. I make these videos because I want to talk about the sport. So if you can leave a comment, do you disagree with me? What did you think about the Mackenzie Dern decision? Do you think that was a good decision? Do you think that Arlovski has a chance at a heavyweight title shot? Do you think I'm wrong about Sean O'Malley? Is he the second coming of Conor McGregor? Let me know in the comment section. I make these videos because I want to talk about the sport, so I'll get some answers to you there. And thanks again. I'll have some more videos coming out this week, and we'll see you there.